If I wanted to quietly ruin my financial future without looking reckless, I know exactly how I would do it. I would not gamble it away in one night. I would not set fire to cash in the driveway. I would not buy a private jet or a yacht, or do anything obvious enough that people would point and say, "There goes a fool." I would do it the civilized way. I would buy normal things. I would make ordinary choices. I would say yes to what everyone around me says is reasonable. I would buy the truck based on the monthly payment. I would call luxuries investments. I would keep subscriptions just in case. I would use points to justify overspending. I would pay 1% here, a few hundred there, a warranty here, an annual fee there, and I would do it so quietly that I could still look at myself and say I'm being responsible. That is how most people lose a fortune, not in one dramatic act. In 1,000 polite little leaks. That is the danger. The reference text you gave me is powerful because it does not focus on obvious stupidity. It focuses on the kinds of spending people defend, normalize, and barely even notice. Buying cars based on monthly payments, treating homes and renovations as investments when they are often really luxuries, keeping subscriptions and status cards that add little value over spending for points, paying asset-based advisory fees that look tiny but compound into enormous losses, mistaking aspiration purchases for identity upgrades. The underlying message is clear. Financial failure often wears the costume of normal life. Fay Felicite Fay turn 27 file 0 Fay. If I were explaining this as honestly as I could, I would say it this way. The most dangerous expenses are not the ones that look absurd. They are the ones that look justified, because absurdity triggers resistance. Justification creates permission. That is why I do not spend much time lecturing people about peanut butter or coffee or some tiny everyday habit that makes them feel human. I am far more interested in the purchases that rearrange the math of a life while pretending to be sensible. The source material says this beautifully at the beginning. It makes clear that the goal is not to shame every pleasure or argue that people should stop spending on what they truly love. The goal is to expose the things that drain money quietly while feeling normal, and to prevent those leaks from destroying the future without ever announcing themselves as destructive. Fay Felicite Fay turn 27 file 0 Fay. That distinction matters. Because I like spending money, I like luxury. I like quality, I like comfort. I am not suspicious of spending itself. I am suspicious of unconscious spending. I am suspicious of the sentence. Everybody does it. I am suspicious of things people call investments because they are too embarrassed to admit they simply wanted something expensive. And I am especially suspicious of decisions made using one of the favorite phrases in consumer America. What's the monthly payment? That is one of the most expensive questions in ordinary life. The reference text starts there too, with cars. And it is exactly right. Buying a car based on monthly payments is the dealership's game, not yours. It allows them to stretch terms, hide add-ons, and turn a larger total price into something that feels manageable because it has been broken into smaller emotional pieces. That is not financial clarity. That is financial anesthesia. Fay Felicite Fay turn 27. File 0 Fay. I have always thought that one of the cleanest signs of financial adulthood is this. You negotiate based on total cost, not monthly fog. Monthly payment thinking is how a person ends up paying thousands more than necessary for something he could not really afford in the first place. And the problem is not just the car note. It is the whole burden sitting behind the note. Insurance, fuel, maintenance, parking, registration, repairs. That is what the source text means when it says total cost of ownership matters more than the sticker price alone. It is reminding the viewer that one purchase can drag a parade of other expenses in behind it, and once that structure is in place, the person is no longer buying transportation. He is buying ongoing obligation. Fay Felicite Fay turn 27, file 0 Fay. That is why I tell people to think in systems, not objects. The truck is not just a truck. The SUV is not just an SUV. The fancy home renovation is not just a renovation. The premium card is not just a card. Each one brings a system with it, And if the system costs more than the joy it brings, then you are not enriching your life. You are renting an identity. That is one of the most expensive games in America. The source material moves from cars into another form of money leakage that is even sneakier because it hides inside self-improvement. Fitness machines, supplements, skincare, grooming products, miracle devices, the Peloton that becomes a coat rack. The reformer machine used twice the grooming solution that was definitely going to solve everything this time. I laughed when I read that because it is such a human pattern. We rarely buy only the object. We buy the future self. We imagine the object will produce. Fay Phalocite Fay Turn 27 File 0 Fay. That is the deeper issue. Aspirational spending is often not spending on the thing. It is spending on the fantasy. The desk is not just a desk. It is the fantasy of being more disciplined. Luxuries is not just a course. It is the fantasies of becoming the kind of person who follows through. The Porsche is not just a car. It is the fantasy of who sits inside it. The source file says this bluntly when it talks about aspiration, fueled shopping, about bathtubs, planners, chairs, meal, delivery services, ergonomic desks, sunrise decks, and other objects. People buy not because the object is essential, but because it seems to symbolize a better, more disciplined, more elevated version of themselves. That is exactly right. Fay Phalocite Fay Turn 27 File 0 Fay. I have learned a very useful rule about this. If an object is carrying too much psychological meaning, it is probably overpriced in your mind. That does not mean do not buy it. It means be honest. If you want the nice mattress, buy it because you want. If you want the luxury faucet, buy it because you want the luxury faucet. If you want the beautiful deck, build it because you want the deck, but do not call it an investment just because the word luxury makes you feel guilty. The reference text is especially strong here. It attacks the habit of calling mattresses, expensive blenders, trainers, skincare, decks, and all sorts of upscale purchases investments when they do not produce a financial return. That is such an important point, not because luxuries are wrong, but because dishonesty about luxuries destroys discipline. Once every expensive desire can be renamed an investment, there is no boundary left. Fay Phalocite Fay Turn 27, File 0 Fay Words matter in money. Investment should mean something. An investment has the potential to produce a financial return. A luxury may produce joy, comfort, identity, health, confidence, or beauty. Wonderful. But those are different categories. Confuse them long enough, and a person will rationalize nearly any spending pattern. That is when the future starts bleeding out in ways that do not even feel like bleeding. Now let us move to another category of silent leaks: subscriptions, extended warranties, points, chasing, unused perks, status cards. The reason these are so dangerous is not that they are individually enormous. It is that they are both invisible and emotionally self-forgiving. A person keeps the subscription because he might use it. He buys the warranty because it sounds responsible. He keeps the premium card because it sounds successful. He overspends for points because he tells himself he is gaming the system. But the source text is exactly right to say that in many cases these decisions crowd out room for the things that actually matter. They are not only costing money, they are consuming intentionality. They are taking dollars that could have gone toward your actual priorities and assigning them instead to forgotten decisions from months or years ago. Fay Phalocite Fay Turn 27 File 0 Fay. That is the real cost of these little leaks, not only the money. The erosion of agency. When you look at a checking account and wonder where the cash went, it often went to old versions of you who never closed the loop. That is why I have always preferred ruthless quarterly reviews, not to punish yourself. To update reality. What do I still use? What do I truly love? What creates enough value to stay? What is only here because canceling it requires 10 minutes, and I have been too lazy or too avoidant to take them? That is a worthwhile question, because every small leak makes the big goals harder. And the big goals are where life changes. Now, let me say something that many people do not like hearing. A truck you cannot afford is not a personality trait. It is math. The source material says this in a deliberately provocative way, and I think the provocation is healthy. It points out that many people making $65,000 or $70,000 a year buy $90,000 trucks or similar vehicles and then act as though this is somehow reasonable because the monthly payment can be squeezed into the calendar. But the math does not care about identity. If the machine of your life cannot support that cost without weakening everything else, then the vehicle is not ruggedness. It is fragility with chrome on it. Faithfulesite, Fayturn 27, File 0 Fay. This is one reason I have always distrusted status spending masquerading as practicality. People do not always buy the thing. They buy what the thing says. And when that happens, the premium is not only in the price tag, it is in the opportunity cost of everything else that money could have become. That is why I want people to ask a more adult question. What is the job of this purchase inside my life? Transportation. Safety, joy, convenience, identity, performance. Show me the job. Once the job is clear, the budget can become clear too. The source text suggestion to get clear on needs before making a big purchase is exactly right. Rent when you truly need special utility. Borrow when the use case is occasional. Save and plan when the thing matters deeply. But do not use a permanent financial burden to solve an occasional emotional itch. That is a very expensive mismatch. Fay file site, Fayturn 27, File 0 Fay. Now there is another class of spending I want to attack because it hides behind an even more seductive mask. Self-care. I am not against self-care. I am against stress spending disguised as self-care. Those are not always the same thing. The source file is sharp here too. It says a massage, brunch, nails, premium gym, or other forms of self-care are completely fine if they fit inside a conscious spending plan. But if they are going onto a credit card you are not paying off, then they are not relief. They are stress purchases with delayed billing. Faithfulesite, Fayturn 27, File 0 Fay. That is exactly right. Real self-care should not quietly create a worse tomorrow. Real self-care should be either affordable or consciously planned. Anything else is often just emotional spending in better lighting. And if a person does not learn that distinction, he can spend years telling himself he is caring for himself while actually increasing the very financial pressure that makes him feel he needs relief in the first place. That is a brutal loop. Break the loop, and life gets lighter. Now, let us move up another level. Overcomplicated investing cult-like finance products. Apps built to make you trade like a lab rat. This is one of the ugliest ways people lose wealth because it attacks insecurity directly. The source text is fearless here. It calls out complex products, high-fee life insurance schemes, infinite banking, overhyped tax shelters, speculative crypto culture, and gamified trading apps. It makes a point I agree with strongly. Complexity is often sold because complexity is profitable to the seller, not because it is necessary for the buyer. Meanwhile, simple low-cost investing through index funds, retirement matches, Roth IRAs, and automation gets ignored precisely because it is too simple to sell dramatically. Faithfulesite, Fayturn 27, File 0 Fay. That is one of the great ironies of modern money. The thing most likely to work is often too boring to market, and the thing most aggressively marketed is often too complex to justify clearly. I have always thought adults should become suspicious the moment an investment strategy sounds like a secret society. You do not need 12 apps. You do not need a wall of crypto theories. You do not need a whiteboard of exotic asset classes to become wealthy. What you need is a repeatable system that grows capital over time and survives your own emotions. That is the rich way to think. Not complexity for its own sake, simplicity with discipline. The source text is also very right to attack noisy finance apps that create digital clutter rather than clarity. A person with 19 tabs, 80 categories, and 4 tracking apps can still have no idea when he will be debt-free or when he will reach $1 million. That is not control. It is aesthetic control. It feels sophisticated while often hiding the absence of the few numbers that actually matter. Phi-Phyllosite Phi-Turn 27 File 0 Phi. I care deeply about that distinction. A false sense of control is very expensive. If the tools do not help you decide better, they are decoration. That is why I prefer a small number of financial accounts, a few key categories, and clear monthly flows over digital theater. Now let us get to where the really big money gets burned. Housing, advisors, renovations. This is where people can lose not hundreds, but hundreds of thousands, even millions, while still describing themselves as prudent. The reference text is blistering here, and rightly so. It attacks the assumption that a primary residence is automatically a great investment, pointing out mortgage interest, taxes, maintenance, closing costs, and the reality that buying may fit a lifestyle but not necessarily the best financial outcome. It also speaks personally about renting for decades and investing the difference, which is a useful reminder that ownership is not a moral achievement. If the math is poor, Phi-Phyllosite, Phi-Turn 27, File 0 Phi. I agree. A house can be a wonderful place to live. It can be the center of a family. It can bring stability, control, beauty, and rootedness. But those are lifestyle returns. Financial return is a separate question. And adults must learn to separate lifestyle value from investment value. The trouble begins when people confuse the two. Then they buy too much house, too much renovation, too much carrying cost, and call it wealth building. That is not always wealth building. Sometimes it is luxury with property taxes. There is nothing wrong with luxury. There is something wrong with lying about luxury. The same principle applies to home renovations. The source text says Americans are delusional about renovations, believing they will simply get the money back. It points out that many renovations are not investments at all, but emotional decisions wrapped up in financial justifications. Again, that is an uncomfortable but useful truth. Renovate for joy if you want. But if it is joy, call it joy. Do not put the word investment on it just to make the debt or the spending feel more righteous. Phi-Phyllosite Phi-Turn 27 File 0 Phi. I like that honesty. If you want the basement, want the basement. If you want the deck, want the deck. If you want the faucet, want the faucet. But then save for it like a luxury. Do not lever your future to pay for a story about return on investment that was never likely to appear. That is how responsible people spend on nice things, not by pretending nice things are all secretly financially optimal. Now let me turn to one of the costliest small percentages in the world. Asset-based advisory fees. The source material is absolutely correct to call this out. A 1% assets under management fee sounds harmless. But once the portfolio grows, the annual dollar amount rises, and because that fee continually skims from a compounding base, the lifetime cost becomes shockingly large. The text says that over a lifetime, this can consume approximately 28% of total returns and cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. That is exactly the kind of math people ignore, because 1% sounds too tiny to fear. Phi-Phyllosite Phi-Turn 27 File 0 Phi. This is one of my favorite examples of how the human mind fails with percentages. People become obsessive about tiny grocery differences, then shrug at a 1% advisory fee on a 6-figure or 7-figure balance. That is backwards. The 1% sounds small because language makes it sound small. Compounding makes it huge. I am not anti-advisor. There are moments in life when good advice is valuable. I have paid for advice myself at times, but I want the advice priced clearly, Hurley, project, base specific, not a lifetime skim on a growing pool of capital simply because someone made the arrangement sound normal. Again, the theme is the same. The most dangerous wealth leaks are the ones packaged as responsible adulthood. Now let us hit another blind spot. Rewards cards, loyalty programs, status cards, premium lounges, metal cards heavy enough to feel important. The source file attacks this beautifully by pointing out how absurd it is to carry expensive credit card debt while bragging about points that are worth fractions of a cent relative to the interest being charged. That is one of the clearest examples of people stepping over dollars to pick up pennies. And the annual fees on premium cards make the same point. If you are not actually using the perks, you are paying for status theater. Faithful site Fayturn 27, File 0 Fai, have no issue with premium cards for people who truly use them well. Use the lounge, use the credits, use the nights, use the insurance, use the status. Wonderful. But if the card exists mainly to make you feel like an upgraded version of yourself, then it is not a financial tool. It is an ego subscription. That is a very different thing. And ego subscriptions are almost never cheap. Now, there is one final theme running through the entire reference text that I want to bring forward because it is the most important of all. The purpose of cutting waste is not deprivation. It is redirection. The source text says this repeatedly in its own way. It is not here to tell people to stop spending on everything. It wants people to spend more on what they truly love and cut hard on what does not matter. It calls this spending intentionally and building a rich life. I think that is exactly the mature way to think about money. The opposite of waste is not deprivation. It is intention. File site Fayturn 27 File 0 Fay. That is why I have never liked moralistic personal finance. I do not want you ashamed of spending money. I want you ashamed of spending without consciousness. There is a huge difference. Spend extravagantly on what you love. If it fits, spend joyfully on what actually improves your life. If it fits, but do not confuse drift with freedom. Do not confuse normal with wise. Do not confuse monthly payment affordability with real affordability. Do not confuse points with profits. Do not confuse luxuries with investments. Do not confuse emotional relief with self-care if the bill shows up later with interest. And do not confuse complicated financial products with sophistication. Most people do not become poor because they made one spectacular mistake. They become poorer than they should have been because they funded thousands of tiny irrational decisions that never got challenged. That is the danger. And that is also the opportunity, because if the leaks are quiet, they can also be plugged quietly. A truck chosen differently, a card canceled, a warranty skipped, a subscription removed, a renovation delayed until it can be paid for honestly, an advisor compensated differently. A mattress called a luxury instead of an investment. A conscious spending plan used before a big purchase rather than after the regret. That is how a person changes the direction of his financial life. Not always with one grand gesture, often with one honest decision after another. And if you keep doing that long enough, something wonderful happens. The money that used to disappear into noise starts gathering force. Then the force becomes freedom. And then you begin to realize the richest life is not the one where you buy everything that whispers to your ego. It is the one where your money finally starts going, where you actually want it to go.